Welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. I'm Bob Delaney, Executive Director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. Labor Vision, a production of the Institute, focuses on topics of importance to working Rhode Islanders. We hope you enjoy this edition. Welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. I'm your host, Bob Delaney. In this generation of people, we know that more baby boomers are retiring now than ever before in history. So the importance of planning becomes a priority. This edition of Labor Vision, we're going to talk to Bob Dumais. He's a principal at Legacy Benefit Advisors, and he addresses the issues that are so important to people in their retirement planning. And I do say retirement planning because it's critical that we look at this situation as one of planning. We would plan a vacation, and in reality, retirement should be the longest, best vacation of your career. And in light of that, it's important that we plan it. We plan when we're going to retire. We do the planning in advance. We talk to counselors and advisors and hope that all of the things that are required for a successful retirement take place. And whether we're talking about Social Security or Medicare or any of the other issues surrounding retirement, it's important to plan. So we thought it was important to ask Bob to come in, have a conversation about planning your retirement vacation, so that in reality, you're able to continue an enjoyable retirement that you worked your whole career to create. So Bob, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You and I have spoken many times about retirement and the importance of retirement. And I think that in the work that we do with organized labor at the Institute, oftentimes we get calls from people after retirement saying, I think I made a mistake, or it's not something I really want to do. And they really didn't plan for it. I think there were so many issues. So could you give me a highlight of the kind of conversations that you have with people or the kind of situations that come up that you know that with a little bit of more pre-planning, some of these situations may not have occurred?
Yeah, and I think that I've met with a lot of those people that you've met with that sat down and said, maybe I should have planned a little bit better.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have workshops around the state on a regular basis. We typically do them once a month, and the workshops are about Medicare, Social Security, retirement planning in general. And then what typically happens is people that come to the workshops, we'll give them a sheet to fill out, and we say, if you have any questions in any of these areas, just check them off and we'll follow up with you. So in fact, we just did another workshop last night, and people do check off the boxes, and we sit down with them, and in some cases, not enough people are planning in advance, but in a lot of the cases, people are coming because they've already messed something up. They took their Medicare and just bought what the neighbor bought, and maybe didn't even realize that. Where I live in Swansea, the other side of the street is a different state, and the rules are different. So I just thought I'd highlight a few different cases. We'll take the names out, but a few different cases where people sat with us and, had they made a better choice, things would have turned out much better. A gentleman we met with recently, his union had negotiated a contract so that once he retired, he would get the same benefit that he had while he was working for 5 years, him and his wife, which is pretty incredible. And he sat down with me, and he's feeling great about himself. And I said, there's one problem with that. In 5 years from now, when that coverage ends, you're going to have a problem with Medicare, because Medicare is going to say your coverage for the last 5 years wasn't creditable. and that's creditable. And it wasn't creditable because it wasn't coming from a current employer, because at that point he would have been retired, so it was a former employer. So this means in 5 years when he goes on Medicare, he's going to pay 5 years worth of accumulated penalties on Part B and maybe on Part D as well.
But it's important that people realize that that creditable coverage is the coverage that you have right up until the day that you retire, and it must come from your employer.
Right. And it would be the same exact coverage in retirement, but while he was working, it was creditable, and while he's not working, it's not creditable. Funny little glitch in the Medicare rules. Some people, a couple of cases where people waited too long to fire up their Medicare. So Medicare gives you some distinct timelines. When you turn 65, if you're not working, you've got a certain time frame to get that coverage in place. If you don't get it in place on time, two things are going to happen. One thing is that you then have to wait for open enrollment to come up, and open enrollment for Medicare comes up in July, so you may go some span without any coverage, which is not good. And the other piece of it is that you may not be able to get on as readily as you would have wanted to. So again, the time frames are pretty strict.
Now on that piece, so that we kind of have a clear understanding of it, we're saying that if you continue to work after age 65, there's no emergency in terms of registering.
Correct.
But if at 65 you are not working, then you needed to plan and register. Right. Before you turn 65. And if I'm not mistaken, you can take as a 3-month window, a 2-month window.
Yeah, like a 3-month window before and after you turn 65 to get that all fired up. Beyond those time frames, now you've got an issue. And we had a case recently where there was some flexibility in there. So the person was actually able to go back to work for a very short period of time. So the last day of work was something more current, and we were able to fix the problem. But other than that, you know, when Medicare penalties are imposed, they don't go away. They're there forever. So those cases come up. They can be problematic. Another case recently, a gentleman from one of the trade unions. So, you know, he sat with us and he said, you know, I retired a couple of months ago. My wife is driving me crazy. And I'm sure she would feel the same way if she were sitting with us. But he said, so I got to go back to work. So he decided he was going to go back to work. And he had already started his Social Security checks. And with Social Security, depending on your age, if you earn too much, your Social Security in the next year will actually be whittled down and possibly go away. It doesn't go away forever. It's deferred and you'll get it at some future date. Yeah. So that's one problem, that if he goes back to work and he earns more than the fixed amount, which he definitely will, he's going to affect his Social Security next year. So that's one piece of the problem, but also when you start taking your Social Security, you're locking the amount you're going to get in at that point in time. Now it can go up if there are COLAs down the line, but had he waited, he would see an automatic 8% increase in his Social Security every year moving forward. But the fact that he started at that point, then he wiped out those several years of 8% increases.
But basically what you're saying then is that if a person does not draw down on their Social Security at a particular time, and they continue to work, every year that they continue to work, their Social Security will go up by 8%.
Right. So between your full retirement age, which for most people is going to be 66 and X number of months. So from that point to age 70, if you delay taking your Social Security, it will go up 8% a year. And so 8% over 4 years is 32%. It's simple interest. So that's a third more that you'll get on your Social Security, and you will get that amount more forever.
For the rest of your life.
So by starting early, he lost out on 8% for, you know, as many years as he doesn't need the money. So that will be a problem for him.
So it's important in that pre-planning to clearly understand that once you retire and you begin to get your Social Security, that's where the planning was critical, because you need to understand if you continue to work there or somewhere else, it has an impact on the total value of your Social Security the following year. Or maybe if you find out that the retirement is not what I want, is there an option to call Social Security and say, turn this tap off, stop it now, I want to go back to work in the job that I was in or somewhere else, and we will turn it back on again at some
That's a good point. Social Security gives you a one-time option to contact them and say, I made a mistake. I should not have started my Social Security 4 or 5 months ago. And you can give them back the money and they will forget that it ever happened. You only can do that one time. And in this case, we told him that was an option, but he said, I've already spent the money, so I don't have it to give back. So that was a problem for this gentleman. I'm thinking of another scenario where, you know, somebody had a good amount of savings in an annuity that they had when they were working. And what they should have done, they had some investment choices within that annuity. Ideally, several years before retirement, they would have moved some or most of those funds into a more conservative investment. Instead, they chose to continue to be more aggressive. The market tanked, and now they're planning on retiring next year, and their annuity is down 20%. So those kinds of decisions, that better planning, the person maybe could have began 5 years ago, you know, shifting the balance of his investments so that they were more conservative, so he wouldn't run that kind of risk right near retirement. So, you know, what choice does he have at that point? Is he not going to retire? Is he going to delay retirement, trying to earn that back? So, yeah, lots of problems come up because people just didn't take the time. And as you said, you know, you plan a vacation, you'll plan it, you know, months in advance, get all the details worked out. Yeah. And for retirement, too many people not investing the time they should.
Yeah, well, I think that it's really important, and we'll come back again and have another conversation. I don't know where the time went, because all of a sudden we're talking about planning on retirement, and we can see that there are just so many issues. We will, at another time, come back and talk about the importance of when you align your Medicare, you have to determine in the plan, do I travel or am I staying here? And does my medical plan allow for me to travel to Florida? And what hospitalization, what impact it may have. So I think what I'd like to do is invite you back for a follow-up session so we can continue this conversation. I would like to invite our guests watching this television show that if you have more questions or if you're interested in having a conversation with Bob, call the Institute at 463-9900 and we will gather your name, and when the time comes that we have a significant number of people, we will plan an information session where you can come in and talk to Bob one-on-one. But in the meantime, we will plan on having another follow-up session in another week or so after people get a flavor of what this conversation is all about. I want to thank you for coming, and I look forward to conversations in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this edition of Labor Vision.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. My name is Jim Riley. I'll be your host tonight. Once again, we've got Dr. Okurowski.
Good to be back.
All right, great to have you. The last show we did was terrific. This is another issue that's very important to lots of people, especially here in New England. And what we're going to be talking about is Lyme disease. So it's we're right in the middle of our big tick season for the year. So give us a little primer on what we need to know and what we need to do about this very infectious disease.
It's a timely topic. There is at least some preliminary evidence that we had a sort of a, wet late winter, early spring, and there's lots of people reporting high incidence of tick exposure. And
well, how does that sort of wet, soft weather, how does that?
Well, what we believe is that's sort of the environment. Sometimes a warm late winter wet is conducive to a high tick population. but what we're at least seeing is lots of people reporting exposures. And what we need to know is Lyme disease is really the most commonly reported tick-borne illness in the United States, and it's a pretty it's a disease with a pretty large scope. CDC estimates anywhere from 20 to 25,000, maybe upwards of 30 to 50,000 diagnosed cases. But there's also more and more evidence of underreported cases we're missing, and recent evidence suggests that the numbers may be much higher, and that means all of us, both in the public and also the medical community, need to be focusing more attention to this disorder.
Everybody knows somebody
Yeah.
who's had Lyme disease.
Yeah, absolutely. And the goal here is not to create panic. It's more educated vigilance. And we all like to encourage outdoor activity, whether that's our kids or spending time in the woods, walking, or outdoor activities like golf and hiking. So we all have potential exposure. It's also not uncommon even found in urban and semi-urban environments, in brush, in parks. So it's not something that's no longer confined to just rural areas. It's clearly higher incidences in rural areas, but we all need to be aware that when we're outside and in the brush or in the grass, we need to be careful. And also, should be mentioned that some of the first cases come clearly from New England. Lyme, Connecticut is the reason why it's called Lyme disease. But some of the highest prevalences are also in our islands. Plum Island, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket. Clearly see some high rates, and we have a lot of folks that spend some vacation time there, so those folks need to be aware of those issues too.
I wonder why the islands are more prevalent than
Yeah, there's lots of conspiracy theories on that one, but I sort of stick to some of the science. But there's lots of people with theories. We don't really know exactly where Lyme disease clearly came from, but everybody has their ideas.
Well, I grew up in Connecticut. And in Connecticut, they believe that the Animal Research Center out on Plum Island let something out of a cage, and it wound up getting into Lyme, and then it started Lyme disease.
I hear
that's
these.
the local folklore.
Right, I hear these. I don't necessarily think there's a lot of science to support that, but it's certainly an interesting story. But we clearly have seen an explosion of incidents, over the last 20 to 30 years, and it's spreading across the United States, and it's clearly in New England and Southwest is now seeing some cases. It's clearly being found in the Southeast. So it's something that may or may not have started in New England, clearly first recognized here, but now is not only a state issue, but also multi-state issue, but also now becoming more international, clearly into Canada and other regions. So it's something we all need to be aware of, and I would agree with you. Most of us know at least somebody, either in their immediate family or a friend or relative, that's been exposed to this. The good news is, caught early, it's quite treatable, but it's also preventable, and we'll start talking about some of those issues. It should also be mentioned, though, that it's something that employers and employees need to be more aware of, and we clearly see folks being exposed in the trades, in construction, landscaping, forestry, people doing land surveying, farming, railroad work, oil field work, utility line workers who all spend significant times outside need to be really aware of that.
I want to take a moment to talk about the actual tick itself. Now, from what I understand, ticks are born in nests, and after they're born, off they go and climb up somewhere, and instinct tells them, okay, sit tight and wait for a host.
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't want to get super technical here, but a lot of people do ask the questions. It should be important to emphasize that Lyme disease really is passed by a specific type of tick, and that's the black-legged tick. So that would be separate from your dog tick. And you'll see on the news and cards and on the internet, it's how to differentiate that. We'd like to minimize exposure to all ticks, But when we talk about Lyme disease, we need to make clear that we're really talking about what is called the black-legged tick and not the standard dog tick. And
Not the deer tick?
good question, good clarification. The black-legged tick is sort of synonymous with the deer tick. And the reservoir where these ticks live is really in small animals. It's actually found on mice, squirrels, and other small rodents. Deer get labeled because the nymphs, the small ticks, actually leave the mice and then grow to adults on large woodland animals like deer, but they also can be on other animals, raccoons, coyotes, and actually humans. And so that's where deer tick is sort of become synonymous with the black-legged tick in the eastern United States. Again, not to get too technical, but when you hear terms like deer tick or black-legged tick, they're essentially synonymous in the eastern United States, and that's the tick as opposed to the American dog tick. It's the black-legged or deer tick that causes or carries Lyme disease, and it's really the nymph that we're most concerned about. But again, the initial host is small animals like rodents, mice, and then these ticks grow and feed on larger animals, humans potentially being one source, or the deer. But getting back to that issue, that's important as families often ask, for example, how can we help control our population in our own yard? It's really one of the hallmarks of minimizing exposure in the yard, separate from repellents, et cetera, is controlling the mouse population and the rodent population, and that's important to do. One of the very simple things that, for example, folks often don't realize is things like bird feeders being too close to the house. What happens is, the birds come, drop the seed. What does the seed do? It attracts the mice. The mice, in particular, come close to your home, can increase the tick population in your yard. So one of the things that often specialists in this area recommend is if you're going to have, bird feeders, et cetera, move things to the periphery if you're concerned about, the tick population in fact in your yard.
That's something I didn't know. One of the producers of this program, Tom Carr, lives down in Charleston, Rhode Island, and out in the country, and he's got he could do a tutorial on how to survive living in tick land. But what are some things that folks can do? What are some, let's say, defensive things?
This is a hot topic, and one of the reasons why is
Preventive maintenance, I guess you would say.
In preventing exposure, one of the clear issues we have is how to keep the ticks off you. And it's whenever you're outside, you need to do some major things with clothing. Keep skin areas covered. Light colored clothing works great. Keep often high socks. But the other issue is the use of repellents like DEET. And many individuals don't want to use DEET. Many people are scared.
Tell us about DEET.
Well, DEET is a highly successful repellent, and it does repel ticks. It's 20.
Where can you buy DEET?
You can buy DEET at any sporting goods shop, also any camping store. Many your CVS would carry it.
Oh, okay.
Many moms are concerned about the health effects of DEET on children. What we need to recognize, though, is if you really want to make sure you're going to repel those ticks, DEET is clearly the most effective. There are some natural products. Some may be effective. It's difficult to compare, though, to the effectiveness of DEET. One of the things that often folks do, though, is they wear protective clothing. There's also protectively treated clothing, permethrin-treated clothing you can find at a camping store. Those also have some repellent properties. All good ways to explore. What I tell folks with kids is if they're concerned, by all means, talk to your family practice provider. And it's clearly an area that if you're concerned, it should be voiced. But again, it needs to be recognized that Lyme disease is a serious illness, so you really need to protect yourself if you're going to spend some time out in the woods. So if you choose to be out there, you need to protect yourself, and many folks choose wrongly not to, and I think that's why we see a lot of the exposure. The other important thing we need to discuss is, once you've been outside in the woods, you need to have a systematic process for checking yourself. And what a lot of folks do is, fully take off their clothing. Many families do what's called a tick check. So they actually take the time to examine a child or other adult, make sure there's no ticks on them, make sure they shower appropriately, and really take that process to heart. Many families I know in wooded areas do that nightly, just to make sure if the kids have been out in the yard or exposed to the dog, they've really been systematic about that process. The other one is, if you have a family pet, you need to be concerned that the dogs can bring the ticks in, whether they're dog ticks or the deer ticks. So you need to really make sure that those dogs are checked. Cats can be possible exposure too. Many people don't like to hear this, but it also raises in the summer months. Sleeping with your pets, you need to make sure that your ticks are in fact free from, your dogs are in fact free from those ticks. So these are all issues that are really part of a systematic process for prevention.
Okay, let's get to this. Got just a couple of minutes left. Let's tell us about the symptoms and how people are going to know that they have.
The classic thing we've all heard of is the bullseye lesion.
Right.
Now, that's not 100% a guarantee that if you do or do not have a bullseye lesion, you're not exposed. But it's clearly a hallmark. If you do have a bullseye lesion that develops after a bite, you need to take it seriously and report it to your provider. But other issues that come up are things like fever, unexplained joint and muscle pains, headaches, chills, fatigue. Those are really the secondary hallmarks after exposure. So you need to be vigilant about those, and by all means report those to your healthcare provider, who can then do some blood tests. And the important thing to recognize is, with appropriate early detection, it's treatable with very basic antibiotics, and that's the good news. And so if you're concerned about it, by all means, talk to your family practice doc about it. And on the flip side, if you're in the workplace and you think you've been exposed, clearly talk to your safety and health professional, because I personally treat many in the construction outdoor trades where folks will be sent over to me to be examined because they potentially have been exposed.
Well, this has been a terrific show.
Thank you.
And I know that our regular listeners will probably, regular viewers have probably learned a lot about something that they think they know a lot about, but really needed to know. Dr. Okurowski, thank you so much for coming here today. This has been a terrific show. And that's it for this edition of Labor Vision. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments. Labor Vision can be seen on this channel 3 times each week: Tuesday at 7 p.m., Thursday at 8 p.m., and Saturday at 5 p.m.